Welcome back, everyone, to Safari's revenue series. This is the series where we're interviewing the operators that are behind the companies that are actually making money in crypto. We'll be diving into their growth strategies and challenges to help you so that you can help your business grow in crypto. Here today, we have Caleb, who's the marketing lead at Football.Fun. Thanks so much for being on the podcast today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, man. I think it's a pretty cool show, especially considering the switch in what I think a lot of people are surprised of like a revenue meta as such. But yeah, super excited to be here, man.
Definitely. It's depressing that we have to have a revenue meta, but here we are and glad to be featuring you today. So for listeners that might be new to you, can you share a little bit more about your background and what brought you to Football.Fun?
Yeah, sure. So I used to work in traditional media and marketing. So I used to work in an agency and we used to manage the marketing for Electronic Arts. So I used to bring to market the likes of FIFA, Battlefield, Star Wars, all those kind of large AAA titles across Europe. Was there for around 3.5 years, primarily working on the FIFA side of things because that is their monster over there, which was a lot of fun being a football fan. But then I kind of got to a stage where I worked on a lot of the larger markets and always had a passion for entrepreneurship. And having been investing in the Web3 space, I kind of saw the opportunity as we went into the bear market, seeing how easy it is to speak to amazing founders and learn from them. So I started to kind of consider making that leap and then took the leap to start off contract work in the industry with studios and everything like that. And then ended up working at a company called Portal Coin and helped them on the GDM and partnership side of things. Was there for around 11 months. And that is where I met the CEO of Football.Fun, Adam. So for instance, do you want to... Okay. So I met Adam at Portal. He had sold his payments company to Portal and he was there we kind of had a crossover around 6-7 months, got to know him really well. And when I left Portal, he basically called me up. He was like, hey, I'm working on this fantasy football platform. Would love to work with you and from the marketing perspective. And I was like, oh yeah, I would love that. Like it's straight up what I've always loved. It also ties into interests and kind of experience I had in the Web 2 world. And I'd kind of known Adam for a while and knew really believed in him as like a leader, especially. So I started working with him in October last year, really kind of getting the product to MVP, which kind of happened in February. And I'm sure we'll go into more details on everything like that, but that's kind of what led me to my journey of starting with Football.Fun.
Awesome. And in your own words, what is Football.Fun today and who are you building it for?
Football.Fun is a trading and fantasy platform, and we're building it for football fans around the world. I think one of the unique things and lucky positions we have is we've built a product for an established audience. There's 3.5 billion football fans around the world. We don't have to create a community necessarily. We just have to tap into the massive community already there. So yeah, we're very much set of like, we're not just building for fantasy fans. We're building for all football fans around the world because the product is kind of relatable to them in different aspects.
Yeah, no, that definitely makes sense. Find an existing niche, help them do something more fun than they're already doing with it. And so you guys launched not too long ago now. You've already made over $1 million in revenue. What's the core business model behind that? And do you see this as a long-term model or are you exploring other revenue streams for Football.Fun?
Yeah, so we're just over the 3-week mark. And we actually just hit 3 million in revenue. So it's been a pretty wild 3 weeks. In terms of how it's structured, is very much a similar model to that of what you see DEXs do. It's based on transaction fees. Similar products to us in Web 2 and in Web 3. Their normal model is to basically resell the product every year. Every season comes around, you resell the product to the fans, and they basically just make their revenue every year by reselling. The issue there is like in Web3, we always speak about ownership and being able to own what you kind of buy. So we wanted to kind of embrace that and make something where if you bought a player now, you own them for many years. So then if you buy the young players, they have longevity in the market for a decade, even in some cases. So we make revenue from the transaction fees and the volume on the platform. It is going to be the way we continue to make money. We don't want to ever go down that route of having to resell to our audience. We want it to be an enjoyable platform and we just kind of make revenue based on and users that we kind of drive into the platform itself.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And so take us back to the sort of like pre-launch period. How long did it take you to get ready from like a marketing point of view before you like hit day one of the launch? And what was it that you were doing in that pre-launch period?
Yeah, sure. So we basically had MVP from February where we had like a small group of people testing it out from friends, family, everything like that. We scaled that up to around 2,000 users in kind of in a point when we were never driving people from an incentive perspective. It was very much through network and people who had played similar games. And it was quite a nice way to test the product and get actual feedback. We never once advertised any airdrops. It was, in many ways, people just saw it as a free to play game, but it had a lot of traction. We had 50% retention. And we saw that, like, in a way, it was the best way to get our best product feedback. You kind of add incentive onto it and you kind of get a mix of like who are the right users, who aren't in this case. So up until launch, we were very much just focused on refining the product. And we knew that if we were to market, especially going into the Web3 audience, they wouldn't care about our free to play version. That is not how the Web3 audience behaves. They care primarily about two things: status or number grow up. Those are the two main metrics or kind of levers you can pull to really capture CT and traditional crypto users. So we knew that like we'd basically build towards that for launch. One was the way that we're going to be launching the platform. We launched the players at a very low price, at an opportunity for our true users to get access to it. But obviously, when you launch it in a certain way, there's opportunity upside, and that kind of leads to a strong network effect, and also kind of leading to, kind of a snowball effect on the timeline. So our big thing was very much to get like good people involved early. So very much get high signal people that from our networks to try it out on our side, not kind of pushing it in any way, but making them aware of it and to get involved. And then it was very much to just line up everything to do a full big blast when we launched Pro. Obviously, we can go into a little bit more details of what the Pro looked like, but up until Pro, it was just very much focused on refining the product in a good way and making sure that we had the relationships in place. So when we did go live with the Pro side of things, we'd be able to capitalize on it.
Yeah. So you mentioned, the things that you think that the crypto world cares about are status and number go up. Were there any non-obvious unlocks, aka something that you didn't expect to work but ended up driving a lot of growth in those early days?
Yeah, I think it's something I strongly believed going into it, but I couldn't exactly say like this is definitely a tactic that would work. And that was streaming and clipping. I think a lot of brands at the moment work with people on CT through threads and written posts, and I think those can feel inorganic a lot of the time. We did do some of that, but I think streaming, if you have a product that is streamable and can get people excited when streaming, it is a much more, it has high signal when people are there actually enjoying the platform, and you can see that this creator that you really respect is actually enjoying what they're doing, and you can see it's actually a real thing. And we kind of came to market with the big thing of wanting to work with a lot of streamers, but streamers only kind of capture their own audience. So then it was like, okay, then how do we clip this up on CT and drive it to new distribution? This worked really well because we worked with a lot of high signal streamers, but we also had like interviews with our investors and everything like this. And it allowed certain conversations that would validate our platform to basically get distributed outside of just their traditional vertical, which kind of what you see a lot in Web 2 going on right now. A lot of people are diving heavily into the clipping side of things, but that was kind of something that I couldn't go and say like this will definitely work. It was more of a thing of like, I think this will work because like you see it in other verticals, it works from like a psychology perspective, and kind of had to trust the process once we came to market with that strategy. So yeah, that's probably the area that was most surprising in the impact it had.
That makes sense. And wanted to double click in there about the investor piece. What types of conversations were you having with investors on these streams? I'm asking this because it seems like investors might not be your core audience. So what about it was sort of creating interesting content or attracting other audiences that you might not normally be tapping into?
Yeah, so we're in a bit of a unique position where quite a few of our investors are actually some of our best players. So because football is as wide as it is, and some of our investors come from similar products in the past and just like they're obsessed. Like there's a large whale affinity for products like this. So we had a lot of investors that were actually just true players. So we kind of brought them on and spoke, one, why they invested, but also two, around like their strategies on the platform. And it allowed for like true validation and like unity of like, okay, these investors truly believe in this because like they love the product themselves, which again, I think allows for signal towards the audience of being like, okay, like this isn't just investors looking at this as like a good way to make money. They actually just love the platform itself. And obviously we were also lucky to have people like Mike Dudas from Six Man Ventures, who has a strong social presence himself on the timeline. So having people like that people follow and kind of respect from his previous investments, being able to amplify their investment in us and his also belief in us as a product was kind of what we focused on. But really at its core was like focusing on like all our investors actually just love football and love the platform. And then we got them involved in like pack openings when we first started. So a game loop that all our community was involved with, but basically getting even the investors involved in it kind of allowed for a nice organic piece and to kind of go on a wider spread.
Very cool. So a lot of teams in crypto struggle with messaging. You mentioned that, there's already maybe an established community of football fans that are out there. But how did you sort of effectively position FBF to capture the attention so quickly, especially as you sort of like made this bridge niche between like football fans generally and then like all the crypto people that are both crypto and football fans or just crypto?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ones. I think it's like very simple messaging of what the core of the platform is, and that's like pick good football players, win rewards, like make it seem as simple as it can possibly be from like people on the outside. The other side is also speaking into nostalgia. So last cycle, a lot of people came into the cycle from NBA Top Shot or So Rare. They had huge influxes last cycle, and a lot of people you'll speak to on the timeline, even the biggest creators, got their career in Web3 started from NBA Top Shot or So Rare. So we tapped it a little bit into the vein of that and saying like those were the first movers, and some people had their most exciting experiences with those, but they were fundamentally flawed from an economy perspective. And then we basically played it on it that like sometimes second movers have a much bigger advantage in this industry because you can learn from the mistakes of the past people. So we focused a little bit on that of like saying like these are like the previous examples that really had product market fit and went crazy last cycle. There was just some hindrances for them to grow. And then having a simple enough message of it being like, even if I'm not a football fan, I can pretty much work out how to participate quite easily because all it is like pick good players, enter tournaments, and win rewards. There's obviously then more depth for the people who are really nerdy about it. But on its top level, it's not something that like an average person can look at and be deterred by. It's making sure it's broad enough to allow for a broad CT audience to think that they can participate in it and want to participate in it while kind of tapping into that nostalgia that I think a lot of people do miss from last cycle.
Yeah, no, I think that a lot of people got in for like NBA Top Shot and many of those other products brought a lot of people from different types of like cultures and niches in that I think we lost a lot of in the bear market as we descended into more degen like activities. So I definitely agree with that nostalgia factor. I think it's a big part. Next, I'm wondering a little bit how you are thinking that your growth playbook might expand and evolve from here off of these early wins that you've had so far. Are there certain things that you'll double down on or want to avoid from these first few weeks after launch? And maybe more generally too, are there other lessons that you learned from your work at EA that might shape how the playbook evolves from here?
Yeah, I think in terms of what we're looking to do going forward is there's still a lot of growth for us in the Web3 audience. There's like, we're still like, we reached 12,000 at the top users, but we kind of at like a 3.5K, 3K user kind of daily users. So like there's still huge growth. I mean, Sorare reached up to like 200K and they're kind of sitting in a similar segment as us. So still focus and double down on Web3 culture. There's a nice network effect, but there's also, because football's a global sport, we're going to expand a little bit more into like exploring other regions and like focusing a little bit more on Asia, a little bit more on LATAM, because huge football audience there, but the takeover we done didn't necessarily reach those parts. They took over CT. That's very English speaking Western world. So it's very much expand to new regions and kind of cultivate communities there, but also kind of user acquisition there, all while kind of looking at that Web 2 world as well. So you look at the kind of history of even, again, going back to the previous products like NBA Top Shot as such, the moments where they really kind of get their validation is when there's validation from mainstream. And kind of like actually looking when NBA Top Shot started working with the athletes and everything like that, there was a lot more validation of people being like, okay, this is actually something that could go mainstream and is tapping into that mainstream audience. We're looking at a similar playbook, and on that side, I can't go into extensive detail on everything like that, as you can imagine, but we're looking at that, like lining it up from like a Web 2 perspective. We would need to get the market into a more stable position before we go massive into the Web 2 audience, because like Web 3 natives are used to volatility. Web 2 not as much, so there's like a timing on that specifically, but yeah, very much focused on like continuing growing in Web3, so kind of starting our foot into the Web2 world in the short term. In terms of lessons on the EA side, I think it's a lesson that I think a lot of Web3 marketers learn pretty early as well. Is just like how nuanced different cultures are and kind of tapping in and understanding the different ways that they consume football content, and also like the different areas you find them in. I mean, even just I just focus on Europe, but the kind of differences in marketing of what you see in Russia versus Germany and such is like, it's very, very culturally different. So a big focus for us is just like understanding and making sure that we facilitate communities and we go to market in these different regions in the correct way for the football fans. So yeah, that's probably one of the biggest learnings alongside, I mean, football fans identify more as like football fans and gamers as well. So like FIFA players aren't traditionally gamers, they are just football fans. So it's like reaching football fans at the core of the game is really where we want to meet them. So those are the main ones at the moment. We also like, there's only so much I can take because FIFA has tens of millions of budget every single year for each market. So you kind of have to approach things slightly differently. But I think the audience understanding is probably the most important part.
Yeah, that definitely makes a lot of sense. So, every sort of fast scaling project quickly faces trade-offs between like, do we go all out on growth or do we go all out on, monetization? And in some ways you kind of have the perfect blend of that, in that like the crypto audience is like potential like strong monetization channel, the Web2 audience is like strong growth channel. How do you think about sort of like that balance right now? Like, do you think it serves you in the short term to like go get more growth or get more money, in terms of like what will like sort of like prove out the durability of your project?
Yeah, I think the first step for us is just like taking these first 3 weeks. We got like heavily stress test from a product perspective and taking feedback and adjusting where we need to on a product level. Then it's kind of a mixture of both. Kind of Web3 obviously has a much higher spend per user, but they also have a harder retention rate because they want to move on to different exciting opportunities very quickly. So there is a lot of opportunity in Web3, but there's also not a place where you can just be like solely there. We have built this product and the company is built in a way that like we want to be the biggest fantasy platform in the world. So we have to start looking at that Web2 world. The Web2 side of things is more of like a position of like when we think the product is in the right position to expand there. One, like simple stuff like just on ramps, off ramps, everything like that, but also just like the market stability and everything like that. So in the short term, probably more focused on the growth in the Web3 side of things. We always came to market knowing the first 2-3 months would be focused on Web3 because, like I say, we're very far off from what our capabilities are to just target in Web3. It also drives good revenue, and then look into that Web2 audience and scaling overall users, kind of looking end of year, early Q.
Definitely makes sense. So as we had mentioned earlier in the podcast, a lot of the crypto projects lean on hype primarily. You guys had a lot of hype going into your launch in the first few weeks. How much would you say of that was organic versus like engineered? Like, did you have like a very specific strategy for how you got there, either with tapping certain people, like you mentioned, like, Mike Dudas from like Six Man Ventures is like an investor. And so like he naturally has a brand, but like to what extent were you sort of like capturing the zeitgeist through like top down KOL marketing versus like bottoms up, people were discovering your product and starting to talk about it virally?
Yeah, we came to market pretty hard on like with like paid activations with people. Like we had to increase mind share pretty quickly, especially because we basically cold started in a way. We literally went around a stage of like we had a core community that loved the product, but CT itself, besides the calls that I was jumping on like for the last 6 months, was not aware of us. So there was an element of we had to kickstart it with paid media, but with like people that were aligned with the product. That with the core mechanism, obviously, like as mentioned, of like there's opportunity there. It started off on the paid side. It snowballed very heavily. So I'd probably say like 95% of all kind of coverage that we got was organic, especially in that peak of that 48 hours, like 2 weekends ago when everything went absolutely crazy. That was purely just from like the snowball effect. And that we did come to market wanting to snowball affect it, but that's a hard one to gauge on how far that snowball is going to go, whether it's just going to go a little bit or whether it's going to go how it went 2 weekends ago. So we came to market and came to market prepared to spend and kind of go to market. But as we kind of saw good growth and the mechanisms were working really well and we saw down day growth, that kind of slowed down a lot because I think there's like a limitation of like when you're getting so much organic traction, but at some point adding paid kind of KOL marketing on top of it actually can come across the wrong way because then everyone feels the whole timeline's bull right now. Sometimes you kind of just have to let it snowball itself. So we came to market the first like week was quite a lot of like working with streamers and working with KOLs around it. After that, it really was kind of letting the organic growth go, and then it's just relationship building with the people that were coming in.
Definitely makes sense. I think that KOL marketing is a mystery to a lot of crypto marketers. They know that it's often done, but when they have to like go and actually do it, they don't know really how to execute it. I'm curious if there's anything that you'd be comfortable sharing about like, like sort of like budget or like number of like KOLs that you worked with across this, and or, like what was your like approach and like sell, and how did you like come up with this like this 5% of like the paid? How did you select those people? Anything that you want to share about KOL marketing to get the initial jump start?
Yeah, I think I think you really need to have a little bit of a touch of the CT timeline and like really have spent a lot of time there. Like you need to actually realize who's like I think there's like KOLs fit into like different segments. I think there's like people who are great for awareness, and then there's a few people that are great for signal. And those are like very high trusted KOLs. They're the one that every brand wants to work with, but they do move the needle because when they really care about their brand, and like their brand is known for, when they speak about something, it tends to be something that is of interest. I went down the route of being like, when working, like looking for them, I was like, okay, I know these are the 15 people that people listen to on the timeline. These are the ones I want. I don't want anyone else on the list. I want these 15, and we're just going to relentlessly like build relationships with them. I have been in the space for a while, so I was lucky where there was like already some relationships built, but going for the high signal people is much more valuable in my opinion than the noisy smaller people, because their audiences will see it and it'll be brand awareness, but they're not going to drive people to take action about it. So it was very focused on like high signal people, and then a little bit of like the medium level creators to just kind of again spread the awareness. But almost all our budget was very much focused on the high signal people. The budget itself was mid five figs on the in terms of the push forward, so it was actually nothing too extensive on that front. It was just very targeted of like, who do we know has a trusted audience right now? Who's open to working with us? And then obviously we kind of siloed it down to also like who are streamers, who are good reading content and stuff like that. So I think it's really approaching of like, it's not always about getting the biggest blast. It's also about the signal. And then the other side is also like, what are they talking about that drives action to it? And like, again, we obviously had a mechanism that was exciting that we knew CT loves. Honestly, I think that's almost the most important part of it all. Because like if we worked with those high signal people, but there was like nothing that people could actually do that interests the Web3 culture, it's really hard then to drive people to it. But yeah, I'd say high signal creators are definitely the most important. And in order to know who those are, you can work with agencies and stuff like that, but I think you do also have to have your own tell on it. And then the other side is like having a mechanism that natively does snowball and capture momentum as such is probably the most important pieces in my opinion.
Yeah, definitely tracks. We had mentioned retention a little bit before and how Web2 users have higher retention but lower spends, and Web3 users have high spend but are a little bit of the goldfish approach of like they're in and they're out. Any thoughts or tactics that you have in mind for increasing or maintaining retention after this sort of initial launch phase that we're in currently?
Yeah, I mean, naturally there will be a drop off. I think it's really just the opportunity for having an edge in a market. We even see a lot of attraction now with prediction markets. I think if there's opportunity for edge in a market, you'll always have users that are there. We naturally also like, we built this for people who are in Web3 and are football fans. It is natively more sticky than what you'd see in like a meme coin casino, specifically because it's more tied to real life events. So it's more tied to like if someone's game, like team is playing and their favorite player is playing this weekend, they naturally will come back to us if they are in Web3 and playing the game. So we naturally are a little bit luckier on the retention side of things. Obviously, the loops of having prize pool winnings and everything like that is also good incentive. There will always be a drop off because I think we did accrue a lot of people that aren't necessarily our perfect target audience within that. But I think for us, the big focus is like we believe the product is very sticky. We see this across the board with a lot of users just because like they're not there necessarily in replacement of their degen trading. This is like a whole new vertical for them. This is like a complete, like their hobby is football outside of Web3. So like they are now using this as their vertical to kind of cross the two worlds. Similar to even like Fantasy Top, right? They've got a really loyal and hardcore community now just because like every week it's like a gamified experience that kind of brings the two worlds together. So there is that world of like, as long as we maintain and improve the product, there'll be good retention because before even we launched in Web3, we had no incentive and our retention numbers were very good. Naturally, of course, like I say, liquidity and everything like that comes and flows with attention. But our goal is very much just like drive new user acquisition into that then. And then that's the whole game, which should be for most apps, in my opinion, is like, especially early days, like, well, we got 12,000 users. That's nothing compared to like what you should be looking at when launching a consumer apps. I mean, that's, we believe we've got a sticky product. We have the numbers to kind of back it up in the past, but rarely the focus is hyper growth, and then naturally you do get some fall off around the edges at times.
Yeah, definitely makes sense. Let's talk about some other metrics. So in crypto, teams often confuse having a lot of mind share with building something real. I think that you've proved that you guys did build something real because the revenue did follow that mind share that you're able to capture. But what are some of the core metrics that you look at either, when you were building that initial product before you launched to try and understand retention and understand how people are using it? And even sort of now, what are some of the North Star metrics that you look at to make sure that the team is continuing to build a business that's durable?
Yeah, I think volume is like, because we're built in a similar way as a DEX and everything like that. Volume is a key part in terms of seeing like people moving between players, adjusting to real life games. Like if you've seen like big sell-offs from certain players getting injured, stuff that makes sense in what you'd want to see from like an active community, that's obviously important. But on a top level, volume in itself, obviously deposits into the platform means we're getting good inflows from new users or existing users, and that's very important for like a sustainable economy. So those two are the big ones: volume and deposits. Obviously just unique users and unique active users as well. Traditionally, you just making sure that numbers continuing to go up is super important. Quite traditional if you were to like look at it from a Web2 perspective. Similar stuff, but just obviously in the Web3 wording and such.
Definitely. If you're advising a founder on building a revenue first company today, what's the one thing that they need to nail from day one, in your opinion?
That's a good one. I mean, it just has to be something people care about. It's really tough because I think it's a vague one to kind of capture. But if you're looking at the Web3 audience specifically, I think it needs to be something that's fast moving. People like fast moving experiences in the Web3 right now, like, and kind of has been the transition since NFTs. Is the reason we see tokens do better and like token marketplaces do better than NFTs these days. Like liquid markets, people really enjoy because they believe they can have an edge on that side of things, and liquid markets also allow for an easier way to drive revenue. Like you look at a lot of the companies that are driving revenue right now, and they all kind of have a similar business model, and that's been like the proven one to kind of work up until now. So I'd say like looking at that, and then really it's having mechanics that Web3 natives like if you're targeting that audience, or just mechanics that you can go to market with that are subtle but make a user experience better. It's a little bit of a tough one to answer unless knowing what the product looks like exactly. But I'd say, yeah, something fast moving, even in Web2 and Web3. I think if you look at all the behavior of users now in Web2, it's people crave very short and fast moving experiences. So that's probably the best thing I could give on that one.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I was reading an article the other day that was saying that we sort of have moved from like this place of like slow traditional culture to like fast modern culture. And now we're like in the dopamine culture phase. And so like that definitely fits for like, we're in a very, very fast moving experience, which is like this, like quick hits, a dopamine culture, short form video, short form games, etc. So yeah. And Web3 users like it even more.
Yeah, I mean they just love to see. I mean, it's also the thing that Web3 allows the most, right? It allows that layer of even speculation, and like that allows quick dopamine on traditional stuff that they already enjoyed. But Web3 just does have an attention span of 2 seconds, so like you really do have to have something that can capture them. Otherwise, there's a million and one other opportunities, and then some Web3 people have Web2 lives as well. So it's like it's hyper competitive, and you have to be able to play that game. I think right now.
Yeah. One more sort of question about lessons from you. Looking back on your career, what's one lesson about growth that you wish you'd internalized earlier?
I think it's on growth, but I think it's also just around the community side of things. And I think that the biggest lesson we've even had over the last like 3 weeks is just you really have to be a Web3 veteran to expect, like you can pretty much predict exactly what's going to happen in terms of sentiment coming your way in both the ups and the downs. And I think you really have to have it been experienced to this industry to be able to know when to understand its product feedback and when to understand its emotions based on financial assets being up to stake. I'd say the biggest like lesson is definitely just like really embracing and learning, like watch other teams, see how that all goes, and you'll be able to prepare yourself very well for when you go to market, or like obviously getting people that have already experienced it is super valuable. But honestly, like this industry is just like it's a seesaw in my opinion. You on the way up, you're like too far on the way up, and they think you're the most amazing person and the most amazing team in the world. On the way down, they hate you, and like it's extremes in both ways. So I think you really have to, as a team, be fully aware, like embrace it, understand it's coming, and you have to navigate that in the way that you believe is best for the business. But that is probably by far probably the biggest lesson from all my roles in Web3, to be honest, is just like you have to learn how to embrace the culture changes and understand that that's not truly how they feel about your product. It's really just how they feel right now about what's going on in that ecosystem.
Definitely. Last question here, zooming out. When you look 2 to 3 years into the future, what does successful look like for Football.Fun?
we're becoming one of the biggest fantasy platforms in the world, not just for football. We have in the scope NFL, NBA. Like, we're Sports.Fun as a company. The goal is to basically dominate fantasy sports across the world. Yeah, we're obviously maybe not in the 2-3 years we will be the biggest, but we'll have a pretty good stead in kind of achieving that.
Awesome. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, Caleb. This was really awesome.
Thank you for having me.